everyone, welcome to my channel. Welcome to today's video. Today's video is going to be the third and final installment in this little mini series that I did where I talk about 5 palettes that I'm on the fence about. So I've already talked about 5 palettes that I wish I had purchased, 5 palettes that I'm glad that I skipped, and now these are all palettes that I go back and forth on almost daily. Should I pick these palettes up or not? So I'd love to get your opinions, but if that sounds good to you, if you like palette talk videos, make sure you give this video a thumbs up. Subscribe if you haven't yet. I would love it if you stuck around. But with all that, let's just get started. All right, so of course I will link the last 2 videos that I kind of did for this series up above and down below, as well as all the makeup that I'm wearing today. But I technically have 6 palettes. I'm calling it 5 because you'll see in a second, but there are 6, so I'm not really following my rules, but it just sounds better when I say 5, 5, 5, okay? Okay, the first one that I wanna talk about while I scoot over and shake the table is the Dieverune Cosmetics Gloomy Gardens. This is the first one that I want to talk about only because I did mention it in my palettes that I'm glad that I skipped. I talked about the Moth and the Moon palette and how the Gloomy Gardens is one that I plan on picking up. But if I'm being honest, this palette goes back and forth on if I really love it or not. This is one where sometimes the swatches sell me, they don't look too dark, but then part of me is afraid that this is a very dark leaning palette, and I like things that are a little bit lighter. I don't like something too smoky. So it makes me a little bit nervous purchasing this palette. So like I said, like any feedback you have on the formulas, on the palettes, etc., please let me know down below. But I really love the color story. I've never tried this brand before. They are a fairly new brand. If the mattes are buildable mattes, like they kind of start off with less pigment and then you can kind of build them up, then I'm sold. If these palettes just have very pigmented mattes off the bat and they're harder to blend out, it just might be a palette that I don't end up using. Like I'll use it 1 or 2 times to test it out and it'll be one that kind of just sits in the back of my drawer. I will have to say though, like again, love the color story, love everything. I'm just going back and forth on if I'll actually get my money's worth out of this palette, so would love your feedback. Now, let's talk about the one that kind of makes the 6 palettes. I'm counting it as 1, but it's technically 2 palettes. And I'm talking about the Bella Beaute Bar, the Ultraviolet, as well as the Dead Roses palettes. These 2 launched at the exact same time, so that's why I'm kind of counting it as 1, even though they're 2, we've been over this. Totally, completely different color stories. These came out in the beginning of the year because the Dead Roses palette was like an anti-Valentine's Day palette. And then the Ultraviolet palette was an all purple monochromatic palette that was a collaborator with someone. I don't remember who, but I know that it was like a collaboration palette. I, first of all, love purple, but I don't love monochromatic palettes. This is definitely kind of a companion palette, which I don't really do. I really just like to reach for one palette and have it be a one and done palette. I don't reach into like multiple palettes, clutter my desk. I don't like that. So that's what's holding me back from the Ultra Roses. The Dead Roses, there was a time where I was gonna pick up the Dead Roses and not the Ultraviolet, but as time has gone on, I'm just worried I won't get my use out of it. Like I'm afraid that it's maybe just a little too pink. And I know what's like tilting me is that I'm telling myself, I'm trying to like justify it, that with both of those palettes, you can take out shades so I can kind of just use those as singles, right? But I don't do that with any of my other palettes. So why would I start now? I just also I love Bella Beaute Bar's formula. I usually love all their color stories. This is a brand, I bought the basic witch palette. I'll link my review video of that up above. And I love them. That was my first time trying the brand. The matte formula was fantastic. The shimmer formula was so good. So I want to buy these palettes, but they're very pricey because they're indie, they're special shimmers. So I understand the reasoning. I'm not like upset about the price point. I just have to really be a little bit more mindful dropping $80 on a palette versus dropping, you know, maybe $20 on a palette. So I just go back and forth because I love their palettes so much, but there's always something holding me back from like actually pulling the trigger. Like for example, I mean, we could even add to the list the Smoky Glam palette. I think that palette is so stunning, but it's so big that that's turned me off from buying that palette. Do I still want that palette? Yes, but I hate how big it is. Same thing with is it the Secret Garden palette from them? Also love that color story, heard great things about that palette, but it's very big. So the Ultraviolet and Dead Roses is one I really want them. And I'm like convincing myself now, because I'm like, well, they are singles, they pop out. It would be really easy to create your own color stories, but I just don't do that. So let me know, like, is the formula so good that I should overlook the fact that I don't use monochromatic palettes that much and they are brighter colors? Like, is the formula so good where even if I don't get that much use out of them, I still want to have them in my collection and I'm just okay knowing that they're not gonna get as much love? Let me know. Then let's again stick with the indies because I mostly buy indies. I have the Adept Cosmetics Heather Austin palette. I did not know of Adept Cosmetics when the Heather Austin palette came out, and I believe this is one of the palettes that really got Adept Cosmetics to be a lot more popular, I think, because I also, if I'm being honest, don't really watch a lot of Heather Austin's content. Nothing against her or anything, I've never really gotten into her content, so I don't know a lot about her as a person or what kind of content she does, quite honestly. But I do like the color story. Once I heard of Adept and once they re-released this palette, I think it was gone and then they brought it back. A lot of people love this palette and I do like the color story. There's some shades in there I could do without that kind of give me like subculture vibes, like the very grungy tones in there I don't love. So it doesn't knock it out of the ballpark for me in terms of color story, but I have been trying Adept a little bit more and more. I didn't love the first palette that I tried from them. I thought it was, you know, okay, but not the best indie shadow quality that I've tried. But I did purchase the Amy Loves Makeup collab and I really like that palette. So it's giving me another look at Adept. I really want to pick up also the Flying Fiddles, but that's not one I'm on the fence about. That's one that I do plan on picking up. The Heather Austin one though, like it's primarily the color story, if I'm being honest. Is this one similar to like Gloomy Gardens? Like, are the mattes good and buildable? Because if they're too pigmented off the bat, this is one that's just gonna be too dark for me. So if you have experience with this palette, I know a lot of people love this palette. So I'm expecting a lot of you to say that this is a really good palette. If you don't like this palette though, I'd love to hear that. So I don't know. This is one where, like I said, just every time I look at it, some days it's yes and some days it's no. Moving on to the next palette is the Glamlite and Betty Boot palette. This palette, I originally was gonna just skip on. I didn't even have it on my list, and then I saw some reviews on it and I was like, oh, this is actually a really pretty palette. So I have no attachment to the IP. I really don't know a lot about Betty Boop other than like very iconic character, but I really don't know anything about her. My parents like did not love them growing up. My mom is French, like she moved to America in her early 20s. So like she doesn't have any ties to like older cartoons like that are American. So just never really knew about Betty Boop. And the color story looked very red. at first, on like first impressions, but then it was the reviews that kind of changed my mind when I saw swatches. The background of the palette is very red, so that kind of like skewed the color story, but I saw that it was a lot more pinky neutrals once I saw swatches, and then I kind of wanted it. To be honest, like I think also what like puts me on the fence for this palette is I know Glamlite does really good sales for Black Friday, and this is one where like if the price is right, I might pick up that palette for Black Friday, because I had the same problem with the Crazy in Love palette, the first Chucky palette that Glamlite did. I didn't love it originally, but then on Black Friday, it went on sale and I ended up purchasing it because the price was right. So I'm kind of thinking that's gonna be the same thing. At full price, I don't think it's worth it, but I do think a little bit less, I could probably justify it and I'd pick it up. I think that it's really cute, and I think that the color story has like a lot of versatility, more so than I was thinking in the beginning. And then the very last palette that I have to talk about, semi-mainstream, kind of, not really, but I wouldn't say it's indie either. Let me know what you categorize this brand as, but it's the Sigma Cool Neutrals palette. So this palette, I love Sigma's formula. Let me just start off that way. So that was just a point towards any new palettes that come out, is I already know that I love the formula. It's gonna be a matter of color story. And when I saw this palette opposite of the Betty Boop, instantly I was like, yes, this is going to be the next best Sigma palette that I'm gonna get. I'm going to love it. Right now I don't have every palette from Sigma. I only have the New Mod and the Ambiance palette. So I was really excited for this palette. It did not get the best reviews from what I remember. A lot of people were saying it wasn't really that cool of a palette, that maybe the theming was off for it. I still don't care about that. Like, I just think like, okay, that's like good to know, but I don't mind it if it's all the way cool or a little bit neutral. But as long as it's not like fully warm, I stay away from like the Natasha Denona Bronze palette or the Natasha Denona Sunrise palette as examples. Like those kinds of palettes are definitely not me. This was neutral enough and had some warm tones where it's acceptable in my book. I still really enjoy the color story. The thing that's holding me back and making it like an on the fence palette is just that, like, is it redundant in my collection? Like, do I have enough neutral palettes? I mean, obviously yes, as if I have one neutral palette, then I have enough neutral palettes, but like, does it add to my collection in like a positive way? Because I want the palette, but I also, like I said, I'm trying to be better about purchasing and being less impulsive and being more mindful and looking at my collection as a whole. And I just don't know if this fits a piece that I don't have in my collection yet. It doesn't look unique enough to me. And that's what's holding me back. Still like want the palette, but as far as like what I have, like I don't really need it. So I don't know if like I want to spend my money. Like I almost, if I had to choose between the Sigma Cool Neutral or the Bella Beaute bar, like I'd probably go with the Bella Beaute bar because that would add at least something to my collection. Because in my mind, those are the same as far as like tier 5 out of 5 for formula. So Bella Beaute bar, even though I might not use it as much as like a neutral palette for sure, it at least adds something. Am I making sense? I hope so. That's just like my thought process on it though. If you have that palette, again, like repetitive, but let me know your thoughts because I really do. I struggle sometimes with like, if I should buy palettes or something, I'm like, with trying to change my mindset, I think I'm almost making it just harder on myself and I'm overthinking this to the point where maybe it's not healthy. I'm not sure. It's quite the possibility. But those are all my palettes, my 5-6 palettes that I had on my list here. I would just love to know your opinions on everything that I've already talked about, but this is where I'm gonna leave you all. I hope you're having a great one and I will see you in my next video. Bye everyone.